today's episode where we explore philosophy not just as an academic discipline but as a transformative way of being. And today's discussion is inspired by the book To Climb is Philosophical. It's a compelling anthology, and we have with us Dr. Charles William Dailey. And he is actually challenging many of the dominant assumptions of contemporary culture, science, as well as modern intellectual life. So we welcome you, Mr. Dr. Daly. We just welcome and greetings from India. Yes. And in
Thank you very
this, thank you so much for joining. And in this thought provoking work, Dr. Daly has argued that philosophy has just more than the accumulation of knowledge or analysis. And he also mentioned that true philosophy is like an ascent, it's like a conscious struggle to rise above something which we call as our instinct, or we can call it our conditioning, we can call it our ideological conformity, passive existence. So he's mostly seeking towards higher range of philosophy where we switch from our traditional thinking pattern towards something which is more deep, something which is more existential and true to human nature. So he has been inspired by many of the thinkers and traditional philosophies, mostly with the philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, and Zunzi, Friedrich Nietzsche, Mahatma Gandhi. All these philosophers has quite inspired Dr. Daly for his work, and we are really looking forward to know more about his work, his philosophy, his ambitions, and what is his contribution to this field of philosophy. And so, in this conversation, we are going to talk about the most deeper concepts like freedom, then selfhood, also metaphysics. Most important, he is also a very spiritual person, if I'm not wrong. He has talked about spirituality. He has been inspired by yogic philosophy of India, and like bhakti gyan and bhakti gyan, all these things has been quite inspirational for him. So we are looking forward to talk and have you here, Dr. Daly. Thank you so much for joining. We are honored to have with us today. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining.
you.
So let us just begin the questions. Let us begin the discussion conversations. So I have this book with me to climb this philosophical. So you all can see it is very nice. It's very interesting, and it consists of four essays on philosophies and especially its enemies. So, first question to you: what you want to say about the enemies? Can you just refer? Can you just give me a glimpse of it?
Yeah, I would say that philosophy has a number of different kinds of enemies, and all of them, I suppose, have in common either a conscious or an unconscious desire to bring the level of human thinking lower or down from where it could be, to reduce consciousness, and especially to
Okay,
reduce self-consciousness.
that's it.
And so the four essays approach this from different perspectives. When I composed the different essays, I didn't have in mind collecting them into one volume. Only later, as I was looking over them, that I see some similarities among the four essays that I include in this volume. Because on the surface, they seem fairly different from one another. And this is where I came to the idea of climbing as a metaphor for achieving a higher consciousness or a higher self-awareness of some kind.
Okay, that's very nice. That means you're talking about just bringing our consciousness from the lower instinctual level towards the higher intellectual level, right? We
Yes.
humans mostly rely on our instincts like animals do. So when we are hungry, we have food. So most likely we are dependent on our instinct, isn't it? And you want to take us towards the higher thought, like intellectual thinking. Most
Yes.
importantly, I'm surprised by the choice of your words, selection of your words in this book. You have taken the words which have kind of stimulated the mind and just made us to think deeper into it. Like you have taken a word, intellectual intuition, kind of tough word to just digest it in a very easier way. But can you just bring some light to it?
Well, intellectual intuition is a term that the thinker Rene Guénon uses a lot, the traditionalist Rene Guénon, who lived in the early part of the 20th century. And it's sort of his generic word for direct knowledge, direct revelation. I use one example from the Bhagavad Gita of Krishna revealing knowledge to Arjuna, and this would be an example of intellectual intuition as opposed to rational calculation or empirical observation. And so, if you look at the first essay in the book, it's called Science and Tradition, and the subject of that essay is a comparison of three kinds of science. One of the sciences is what I call Enlightenment science, and it's what most people think of as science today, where you have a combination of empirical observation and then rational calculation coming together. You look at evidence, you evaluate the evidence, you test it. Sometimes a hypothesis survives the testing, sometimes it doesn't, and this we call the scientific method. But this is only one form of science. Another form of science that I talk about, I call scientism, which is a term already in use, of course. And scientism is the use of the term science, or sort of the power of the idea of science, to persuade people to believe in things or to do things because they believe it's scientific without truly understanding the scientific method or what science is. And then the third form of science that I discussed in that essay is traditional science. And traditional science is what Rene Guénon talks about and other traditionalists talk about. And it talks about ancient methods of direct intuition, intellectual intuition of reality, metaphysical reality, not just observing facts or not just observing the natural world, but having direct insight based upon preparing oneself to see directly into the manifold of things, you might say.
Okay. It's like categorizing science in different arena based on the purpose that it is met. Like you mentioned, the traditional science. So traditional science is more about strengthening the belief system, whatever belief system we have, isn't
Well,
it?
traditional science, it's not necessarily about strengthening a belief system, but it's the most ancient of the three kinds of science that I discuss. And it's science in a more holistic way of thinking than what I call Enlightenment science or modern science is, because it's based upon methods of self discipline which
Mhm.
allow one to interact with reality in what you might call a more complete fashion. So instead of sort of setting up tests and setting up your laboratory and deciding what your variables are like a modern scientist would, it's more about changing the entire person, not just about cultivating your rational side or your powers of empirical observation, but your levels of self-awareness and um, your ability to change yourself in order to see deeper into things.
Oh, that's looks very nice. Like you are connecting the traditional knowledge system with moreover our self-realization, like we have read in the Maslow's hierarchy. And considering this fact, I would like to understand more about you, like what has brought you to this field, to this philosophy, how you got inspired to, take from all these sources, the traditional sources. Can you just tell me about yourself and your place, so that listeners understand more about how the philosophy has enriched you, how you learned all these things?
Well, let me just give you a sketch of my intellectual journey, I suppose, and maybe that will make more sense of where I come from
Sure,
with
sure.
ideas. So, as an undergrad, as I said earlier, I began as a physics major. But I was more interested, I discovered, in the philosophy behind physics than the mathematics, although I do like mathematics. I do enjoy mathematics. And so cosmology and the theory in astrophysics made me sort of go further into the philosophical aspects of physics than the physical aspects or the mathematical aspects. But at some point, I decided to change my major to history, and I was very interested in ancient history and medieval history. And I studied the ancient Near East for quite a while, Sumerians, Syrians, Akkadians, etc. And became interested in symbolism to a certain degree at that point as an undergrad, but not in any great depth. After I finished my bachelor's degree, I studied philosophy at the University of Houston and took my master's in philosophy. And I studied Martin Heidegger for my master's thesis, Martin Heidegger's Philosophy of Art, the German philosopher. And again, there was sort of a connection to symbolism in that case also, and just thinking about the symbolic aspect of art more. And then I went on to UNT years later. I taught for a while and did some other jobs. Then I went on to UNT. And at UNT, my PhD is in philosophy, but it's from a department of philosophy and religion. And most of the courses I took were in either environmental philosophy or South Asian philosophy or East Asian philosophy or South Asian art or East Asian art. And so at that point, I chose as my dissertation topic serpent and dragon symbolism around the world, including South and East Asian serpent and dragon symbolism, but also South American serpent and dragon symbolism, North American, European, African a little bit, Central American, like the Maya, for example. And so all of these things, in the course of this, studying both philosophy and religion, I became more interested in comparing all of these different philosophies and religions. And I suppose, one of the most important things to realize about me is my interest in comparative philosophy and religion. And this book that we're talking about today, I think, shows that to a great degree, because I have essays on ancient Chinese philosophy, Gandhi's philosophy, which appeals to ancient Indian philosophy, Plato's philosophy, and then different ideas of science, not just the modern idea of science that I mentioned earlier, that most people think they understand, but may not necessarily understand.
That is very true that you have in this particular book you have taken a lot of idea on comparison. You have taken Chinese philosophy, Indian philosophy. It's like bringing the wonders of what we have so far in our traditional aspects as well as in our modern aspects. And also, one thing I was very curious about is that you mentioned somewhere that academic philosophy is not something which is going to enrich us, which is going to enlighten us. And your journey so far seems so academic. And this academic journey has only inspired you to become the philosopher, to think, to criticize on the text, or to bring something new towards the text. So, can you help ourselves to digest this fact that how long this academic philosophy is important for us to become a philosopher, or is it not so important?
How is it important? Is that what you ask?
Yeah. How you feel that academic philosophy is quite important for us to become a philosopher? Because many today's world philosopher, they are not into academics. They are consistently bringing something new towards a philosophical development. So there are other side which believes that we don't need to be into the academic standards to be a philosopher. But as your journey seems to be, you were into the academics, you study all the fields, you are definitely a multidisciplinary because you have the idea of history, you have the idea of physics, and also you have the idea of philosophy. So you have the multidisciplinary aspect. And right now, you're choosing to be more philosopher than an academic philosopher. I don't know what's your purpose, ambition, but this is what seems to me. So, can you just give a highlight that is it important for us to be into academic to become a philosopher?
Well, I would say that there are philosophers who are in the academy who teach at universities, and there are philosophers who don't. But not every individual who is called a philosopher is necessarily a philosopher, or not every individual who has a doctorate in philosophy is necessarily a philosopher, because a philosopher is someone who approaches life in a certain way. And I think that there's a danger in academic philosophers, so-called, just doing whatever they're told to a certain degree, publishing in a certain rate, going to a certain number of conferences, doing all these extra things that, in my opinion, take away from actual philosophy, actual thinking. But it sort of happens slowly over time. At a young age, they're encouraged to do all these things, to make all these commitments for social interaction or social improvement, sort of ladder climbing, which I think are really the opposite of the spirit of philosophy. I mean, some of the greatest philosophers in history did nothing of the kind. And the individuals who do this sort of thing all the time talk about those individuals who didn't do that sort of thing at all. I mean, just to talk about Socrates, for example, he didn't write anything down. He just thought about ideas and talked to people about ideas. I would say that's more of a philosopher, the archetype of a philosopher, than what are today called academic philosophers who churn out one or two articles every year or two in what are considered prestigious journals, or go to whatever are considered prestigious events where they connect with other people and network with people and things of the sort. I don't believe that many historical philosophers, whether South Asian or Western European, would agree that that's actually philosophy anymore. Also, I would say that as a lover of wisdom and someone who must investigate many things, as Heraclitus said. Heraclitus said is a philosopher is someone who investigates many things. The more of a specialist an individual becomes, the less of a philosopher they become. Because to be a philosopher is to not specialize. So, I mean, you can have your particular field of study, but you have to keep in mind that in order to contemplate big ideas, you can't immerse yourself in one tiny area, let's say of analytic philosophy, some one tiny area of metaphysics or epistemology or something like that. I'm sure this would offend a lot of people, but I just think this is the case with, the archetypes of wisdom around the world up until the 20th century were not the same sort of people that many academic philosophers are today, in my opinion.
That sounds really amazing. You said that the more individualistic the people become, the less specialized they will be. In the sense that you want people to be delved more into the subjects, like exploring the history of philosophy, exploring metaphysics, epistemology, whatever suits them, to go deeper into that instead of becoming master of one. That is what you are trying to bring to this platform. That we need to be more diverse. We need to have ideas about what is going around the world in this field of philosophy, what people are doing, what they're bringing. So many things is there about philosophy that we need to discuss. Right now, the present day problem, which I think, and even you might have felt, is that the lack of interest in philosophy. It is a philosophy is something which is part of our life. We cannot, remove or just remove philosophy from our lives. But still people are not choosing to become
Hopefully not.
philosophical, isn't it? Yeah, can you just give a reflection on this?
On not removing philosophy from our lives, or what specifically?
Yeah, yes, specifically I mean to say that how can people be interested in philosophy? How can people choose philosophy in their day-to-day life and conversation? Because it's a kind of complicated subject. Not most people understand this. But if we want to bring their attention, bring their interest to philosophy, what is the one thing that we can do?
Well, I think everyone's born with an interest in philosophy, and it's educated out of them. Uh, like the old saying, an academic is someone who's been educated out of their own intelligence. I think that may have been Arthur C. Clarke that said that. But I think children are philosophical and have awe and wonder at the world. Aristotle said that philosophy begins in awe. So before they're trained to write a certain way or to read articles in a certain way, first of all, humans are just in wonder at the magnitude and the diversity of the world, of the universe. And this is what inspires the love of wisdom, the desire to understand the basis of all that, understanding, standing under something and looking up and figuring out what the structure is that holds it all up before one is sort of pushed along one's career into specializing and specializing and fitting in and fitting in. Philosophy is the opposite of fitting in, I would say. So you have to follow your own intuition about what seems important and what seems deep and what seems true. And every time you come to a fork in the road, so to speak, where you have to decide whether to promote your career or whether to dig into something that you think is fascinating, you have to think very carefully about that, I think, because the philosophical side of every person really wants to look deeper into the nature of reality, whatever that means. And they may not know what that is at first, and it may not fit in to what other people are thinking. So if you're in a certain group and everyone has sort of some general view on some topic in Aristotle or some topic in metaphysics or whatever, and you happen to decide that this is not correct, socially that could be considered dangerous, but philosophically it's an improvement. You've dug deeper into yourself, maybe at the expense of being accepted into a group, but with the reward, now you have a greater understanding. I mean, there are all these stories of sages, especially in the East, but also in the Middle East. When I say the East, I mean China and India specifically, but also in North Africa and Egypt, uh, living by themselves and coming to realizations by themselves. And I think there's something to be said for solitude in the evolution of a philosopher. And although some philosophers like Socrates were around people every day, I think there's another aspect of philosophy where solitude is required. Arthur Schopenhauer said that nothing great was accomplished without solitude. I feel like that's been lost to a great degree. When I observe the academic world, and again, I keep going back to this topic, but this need to network and present all the time, I think that takes away from the time that is necessary for reflection, for deep reflection. That's the essence of philosophy for me.
Okay, that sounds very interesting when you said that children are philosophical. They know by their own nature what to do, how to inquire, what to look more. They are curious. I think
Yes.
you also have mentioned in your book that we have to be curious. We have to know the things more than what we know. That is
Yes.
something which you said, and also you mentioned about. Okay, I have just battery is lost. I will just connect from other device. Give me a time. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
So yes. So you mentioned about children, and then you mentioned that we have to explore philosophy to its core. And this idea
Yep.
perfectly matches with what you have referred in your book. One word which I got totally inspired by. You mentioned about habitual intoxication. Habitual intoxication. So I was like really wondering that how come you have chosen such a very inspiring words. Can you just reflect on this habitual intoxication? Is it in reference to what we practice as a philosopher, or what it is all about? Is it about our life?
Well, that's in the Gandhi essay. Gandhi on the Freedom of Indian Civilization and the Slavery of the West is the name of that essay, the third essay in the book. And it's the idea that um, modern Western civilization, not all of Western civilization, but the modern West, like modern America and modern Europe, over time, over a few centuries, has developed forms of activity and entertainment that do habitually intoxicate individuals to sort of forget looking for truth and forget looking for themselves, and to be continually distracted by uh, a continually expanding set of entertainments. So there's this intoxication with all of these things that fragment the self and take the self away from a search for what it really is, because there are so many things distracting it all of the time. And Gandhi's argument, in part, is that this is intentional and systematic in the West, in the modern West. He sort of vacillates on this a little bit. Sometimes he says the modern West, and sometimes he just says the West or European civilization. And it seems as if he's using these synonymously, but it's not exactly clear in all places in his writings. But I think he means the modern West specifically, modern Western civilization.
Okay.
So there's this
Uh,
intentional
yeah.
distinction. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So habitual intoxication, it's more about deviating from the truth or not seeking what we really want to seek.
Well, habits are unconscious behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So before you form a habit, the first time or the first few times, you're conscious of what you're doing. Like when you learn to tie your shoes, or you learn how to open and close a certain door, or you learn how to brush your hair, or something like that. These things are conscious, very conscious at first, but over time can become unconscious. And when they're unconscious and you don't think about it, they're habitual. That's what habitual means, is to do something without really giving thought to it. But it can expand beyond just basic self-maintenance actions like that to other parts of life. You may habitually talk about certain subjects without really thinking about it anymore. You may be led to talk about other subjects because of the people you're around. If you're not careful, you'll be drawn into talking about the same things over and over again without really thinking about it because the people you're around talk about those sorts of things. So it becomes habitual. And all of this takes time. And the more that you're drawn into habitual behavior, the less time there is for conscious behavior, conscious action, and seeking and wonder, like when you were a child and you realize you didn't understand anything. Children realize they don't understand anything, really, for the most part. Some adults think they do understand everything as they get older. And I believe that's a very unphilosophical attitude.
Habit. Yeah, that's very deep. I believe that you should continue saying what you were saying because it was all sounding so philosophical, so interesting. You mentioned that habit is something which is not consciously being practiced. It is something which is coming out of us
Right.
automatically. We are just
Correct.
tuned into one music or something, and we are just following it without actually choosing it, without actually practicing it the way we want to. So this is something very deep. Even in habit, also, I think one should be conscious. If one is practicing something every day, that we call it as a discipline, something which you practice every day, a form of discipline. So that should be very conscious. That should be consciously chosen, not something like that you are not in a mood or you don't want to do it, but still you are doing for the sake of habit. For example, many people don't like to go to their workplace, but they feel that it is something which is paying them. And so they make it a habit. Okay, let us go. Let us just do whatever the boss is telling us to do. So that is not something consciously chosen. And you're trying to say that something which is not consciously chosen are making us lesser human, are making us something which is
Yes.
more instinctual and not intellectual,
Yes.
isn't it?
Because because being human is being conscious. If you have no conscious, if you're not conscious, you may look human, but you're not exactly being human. You're not actualizing your humanity. It's as Xunzi says in the article on the Chinese philosopher Xunzi, you have human nature, and then you have what I call human being, and the two are not the same. Xunzi talks about human nature. We're all born with human nature, but that's not exactly the same thing as what you can become. You may become or you may not. And I use the term human being to describe the latter. And so human being is based upon becoming more conscious. Human nature is based upon becoming less conscious or staying unconscious. And that's the world of habit, the world of instinct. Habit is a form of instinct, you could argue. Um, we're born with certain instincts and then we develop habits, but in both cases, they're relatively unconscious forms of behavior that humans have, instincts and habits. And then you have conscious forms of behavior where you reflect on these things and you can change them. You can only change them if you reflect on them, and that requires consciousness. And so this is a major point in that article on Xunzi's philosophy.
That is very deep. You are saying that instead of being inclined towards human nature, we have to be more towards human being. That means realizing our existence, choosing ourselves more, becoming. You have mentioned a lot in your book that instead of practicing what we really do instinctually, we have to become. We have to ascend. We have to be more than what we are. towards the self-realization. So this thoughts that you have mentioned, it's quite enlightening. Yes. So
Yeah, there's a quotation from the Italian philosopher esotericist Julius Evola that I include. It's about skiing. He describes skiing as the quintessential modern sport, and he describes mountain climbing as a traditionalist sort of sport or activity. One, there's descent. In skiing, you go downhill. In mountain climbing, you go uphill. And for Evola, skiing is the quintessential modern sport because a lot of modern behaviors are based upon the exhilaration of descent, of sort of being carried away into something. You feel like you're doing something, but you're really just falling, and it maybe makes you feel good or it makes you feel like you're going somewhere, but there's not struggle involved where you find yourself like there is with mountain climbing, where you don't know, you can't really see what's next above you. You can see what's next below you. So there's the feeling of making progress, but you're not necessarily as in control either as you're going downhill. So it's just sort of these two different sports that symbolize for Evola the modern disposition toward life and the ancient or the traditionalist disposition, skiing versus mountain climbing.
that's very brilliant. That's very true. And related to the same concept, you have mentioned that instead of just being into something, some zone, like out of habit, we have to really choose. We have to really struggle. And you have also mentioned that instead of following the collective ideology, we have to more towards the individualistic nature of us, like what we think, who we are, who we choose, instead of being collective, because collectivism is moreover like a follower thing. You're following something which you don't want to, and you are into the collective zone. So you have differentiated very beautifully this aspect of individuality and collective, and choosing more towards the collectivism. Sorry, not collectivism, choosing more towards the individualism, because it requires struggle. It requires your courage. You also mentioned your courage something in your text. So this parameters is quite interesting, and also it's motivating, because as a philosopher you need to bring something new every time. You have mentioned about novelty, isn't it? So novelty, can you just express more about the novelty? How can we be more new, bring something new to the table, or contribute something more than what is already there?
Well, in that essay on novelty, I'm making the point that novelty is based upon frame of mind or thought, and not based upon finding something new out there in the universe. In that essay, The Meaning of Novelty in the Platonic Universe, I'm criticizing a cosmologist named Lee Smolin. And he is criticizing Plato and Platonic metaphysics. And his argument is that novelty cannot exist in a Platonic universe, a universe that is describable by Plato's metaphysics. And the reason is that because in Plato's metaphysics, the most real things are these forms or ideas that are metaphysical. And everything in the physical universe is a reflection of a form. So, you have good things that are a reflection of the form of good. You have wise people who are a reflection of the form of wisdom. All of the good things and all of the wise people die eventually or go away. But the form of good and the form of wisdom is eternal. And from Smolin's perspective, you can't have novelty because there are always these forms that physical things are just reflections of. So anytime you have a new thing, a new wise person, or a new good thing, his argument is, well, it's not really new because the form already anticipated its existence. It's just reflecting what was already there. And I'm arguing that novelty is something that our minds as human beings, conscious human beings, can always distill out of the universe. So we don't have to find a new planet out in space or a new species of animal on Earth to discover newness. We can live in the same environment every day and still discover newness, even by perceiving the same objects that are always around us, the same home, the same food, the same furniture, the same computer, by choosing, by enacting our will to see things differently. It's not just a passive experience. Smolin takes the approach of defining novelty as if it's a passive thing, like, oh, look, we've just discovered a new planet, or we've just discovered a new species of animal. When in fact, every person can choose to see things that he always sees every day in a new light. She can exercise her imagination and see things as new or as novel. This is the essence of that long essay, is just to say that it's not for something out there in the physical world to show us something new. It's for us to decide to see it in a new light.
Okay, that means we have to see different shades of colors instead of being, finding instead of finding something new color or something. We can just see different shades of one color itself. That is what you want to bring. That we have to see different perspectives in the same thing. We you might have heard of this Jainism principle. We call it anekantavad, where we try to see the things from all round perspectives. So that the philosophy that you have mentioned here is quite matching with the Jainism ideology of Anekantavad. So that is quite interesting for our students also to relate with what philosophies actually means, what philosophy actually want us to see the world as. So that is definitely a very, very intellectual and very something very enlightening for us to understand the philosophy as a real world subject, a real world wisdom. You have mentioned about the wisdom. You have mentioned about the knowledge, and a lot of things you have mentioned, which is quite of bringing us towards something which from which we know towards something which we don't know. From the known towards the unknown, it is bringing. So that ideas I really enjoyed, and whenever I read it, again and again I read it, I find something new. So I think that is the accurate definition of novelty, because every time I read something, I find something new. I thought that I will finish this book within a month or 2 months, something. I told you that I'm reading it. But like after completely reading also, I thought that no, there is something missing. I should read it once again. I should understand once again. And then I went through it again. And still I found that there is something more to it. So I think that is the novelty you are trying to mean, that always we have to look some new thing towards the same thing. And even to your book, this to climb this philosophical, where I found that many new things, many ideologies, many perspectives, wisdom, narratives. So that is a kind of very interesting book that you have written. It's very good for us, and for beginners also who is not so certain about philosophy, they can also read, because it is a compilation of four essays, isn't it? Four essays you have take. So even if they, and this all essays are from different dimensions. You mentioned about science. You mentioned about human being, human nature. Zunzi, I have not heard of this Chinese philosopher before, but because of your book, I got the idea of how wonderful this philosopher is. What a writing it is! What a imagination! So I was really, fascinated by all these thoughts. And I hope it all has amazed
Thank
you
you.
also. You have mentioned about Mahatma Gandhi from India, and how his struggle, political struggle, has really impacted the world. So when I talk about Mahatma Gandhi especially, you have mentioned about his freedom. So can you just define more about this freedom aspect, that what you wanted to try about his freedom, because it is freedom of politics also, and spirituality also. But what was your thought when you were choosing Mahatma Gandhi and his struggle and his freedom?
Well, Gandhi argues that freedom is something that is there from the beginning in every human being, but it's covered over or hidden by what he calls the brute. So the animal aspect of humans, the animal nature. And all of these different disciplines that he refers to, um, like prayer, brahmacharya, these things, or ahimsa, these things allow one to distill the spirit out from the brute, and the spirit is what is free. in an individual human being. So the essay is about how Indian civilization is geared toward distilling the spirit out of the brute, of releasing the spirit out of the encasing, one might say, of the brute. But modern Western civilization does the opposite. It tries to put more and more layers over the spirit, which you could call layers of the brute or the animal. And so these two civilizations have different directions. They both say that they are attempting to improve humanity, but by humanity they really mean two different things, and so they go in diametrically opposed directions. So freedom for Gandhi is revealing the true essence of a human being, and that essence is not his instinctual side or his desires, his animal side. It is what is revealed through exercising these different practices, like ahimsa, brahmacharya, prayer, etc. All of these things in different ways allow one to connect with God. But for Gandhi, God is truth. It's the highest principle. So it's not necessarily a monotheistic idea of God like many so-called Western religions have. Islam, Christianity, Judaism. It's a spiritual reality. And so by practicing these things, one comes to understand that spiritual reality is the deepest part of oneself, underneath or inside of the brute. And some civilizations attempt to help you discover that fact, and some civilizations attempt to make you forget that fact. And for Gandhi, traditional Indian civilization helps you to discover that about yourself, and modern Western civilization tries to keep you from remembering it, and perhaps intentionally.
That is very deep. The philosophy that you talked about, Mahatma Gandhi, and the aspect of spirituality, that we have to move from being brute towards being more human or more spiritual human. So this is something very challenging for us, because this modernity is bringing different aspects in us, and that is what you mentioned, something about enemies, the forces that can dissolve the truth. And mostly you mentioned about the opinion, the feelings, that is not bringing the truth, isn't it? You mentioned about the opinions, mostly that opinion is not the truth. We have to differentiate between what is opinion and what is really truth. And when you're talking about Mahatma Gandhi, his challenges, his struggles, and how he has talked about also my experiments with truth, isn't it? That
Mm-hmm.
how truth is relevant, how much truth is important. And you are also trying to bring distinction between the truth and the opinions. We have different opinions, we share with each other, but we cannot consider it knowledge. We cannot consider it something which is going to enlighten us. And that is what also you mentioned in your book about the opinion thing, the knowledge thing, the truth thing. So in this world which is mostly driven by opinions, because you know that we are in these ages where we are in the social media and all the world, we are more over fascinated by opinion, isn't it? Somebody saying something, some figures, some numbers, we are just highly fascinated. We don't go towards the truth. So, to this world, what you would like to say, that what we have to do with these opinions and how we can keep the opinion aside and bring more truth to the world? How we can do it? Can you just show some glimpse?
I mean, this is a problem that goes back to the beginning of Western philosophy, with Socrates talking about the difference, and Plato talking about the difference between truth or knowledge and opinion. These are two different things. And I think today it's particularly dangerous the way people use the term truth when they really mean opinion. So the expression my truth is very common, at least in the United States. I hear it a lot. Someone will talk about what their truth is, as if truth is something that they can possess, when in fact what they really mean is their opinion or their outlook on life. And I think that that's fine to have your own outlook on life or your opinion, but you shouldn't co-opt a term that means something completely different. But even scientific truth is limited from the perspective of traditional philosophers, or philosophers like Plato, and some who are more metaphysical in their thinking. Um, Again, empirical evidence does not give one the whole truth about a matter. They're just aspects. Each bit of evidence is an aspect of a larger truth, and one always has to keep that in mind. So even scientific statements, scientific facts, are not exactly equivalent to truth any more than my personal opinion in politics or about the world in general. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure if I answered your question or not on that.
Yes, kind of. But I was more looking towards the fact that even though we don't read the books, the philosophical texts and all, but still we choose to being truthful, isn't it? Because we know that we everyone is not reading philosophy, everyone is not practicing philosophy, but everyone can practice to be more truthful rather than being opinionated. Like opinion, having opinion is not bad. We should have the opinion, but we should not forget what is true. We should not go away from what is real, what is realistic in nature. And for that for answering that, I think you have mentioned special traits of human, like being superhuman, superior human, isn't it? Zunzi, you have taken this thought and you have
Yeah,
mentioned
that's in
that
the
we have to
Shinzi
be a
part.
superior human, isn't it? Even Sri Aurobindo
Uh,
talked about that we have to be a superman. So can you just reflect on this superior human, the superman aspect that we want to have with this humanity?
this is something that Junzi talked about. So I talk about that in that essay on the Chinese philosopher Junzi. He talks about the inferior man and the superior man, or the gentleman. He also, in some translations, it's superior man. In some translations, it's the gentleman. And so the gentleman lives according to discipline, and the inferior man lives according to instinct. This goes back to the distinction between human being and human nature. So the inferior man is still in his human nature. He hasn't pulled himself out of his human nature yet. He basically lives an instinctual life or a habitual life, which implies a less conscious life. The superior man or the gentleman lives a more conscious life because he practices all these disciplines. And the discipline can be in basically any part of life. It can be in speech, being precise in speech. It can be in, you know, uh, exercise. It can be in fighting. I mean, this has been in noble societies. Upper classes have always trained, especially young men, in the art of fighting from a young age because this was thought necessary to preserve the class. And so, again, this is about discipline, though. Discipline in speech and discipline in fighting has characterized upper classes in different cultures around the world throughout history. But it all goes back to discipline. So the gentleman, the one trait that defines a gentleman or a superior man is discipline, and that does not define the inferior man. And the inferior man may work hard, may do a lot in life, but that's not the same thing as cultivating discipline in different aspects of life, because discipline implies self-control, and self-control implies a certain level of self-awareness. So, I mean, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the distinction between the superior man and the inferior man.
That
It's
is
it's not the
very, yes, yes, continue,
Nietzschean
continue.
idea, the Ubermensch. That's another thing
Yeah,
people often think of when they think of the superior man. It's the Nietzschean idea, the Ubermensch. That's not exactly what I'm talking about.
exactly. Okay, that is not something which you're talking about. You're not talking about niche idea of Habermas or being Superman or something. You're not talking about that. You're talking mostly about how we have to become more conscious. How
Yeah.
to how do we really have to choose uh, the things for us rather than the things choosing us, isn't it? That is what you would like.
Well, in
You're.
the essay on Junzi,
Mhm.
I mean, he talks about ritual being the basis of becoming a human being versus just living as human nature. And ritual makes one memorize and sort of control oneself to the degree that one has to master something. Ritual makes one master something, whereas not engaging in ritual does not. So I mean, all of these rituals that may seem unimportant on the surface of things, whatever the subject is of the ritual, it makes one master a certain aspect of himself that he otherwise may not master. That takes time. Rituals take time to learn and to enact, and that brings out something different in a person than not living according to ritual. And so for Junzi, ritual is the basis for education, and education is the basis for creating a human being out of human nature.
Oh, that's very interesting. Like education is something which is making us human. That is making us human out of our human nature. So it is
Yes.
making us mostly human being.
Well, the root meaning of education is to lead out of something. And so, the process of leaving the cave in Plato's allegory of the cave, I'm sure you're familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave dweller is led out of the cave where everyone else stays. For some reason, this individual, by himself, ascends to the surface world from the depths of the cave. Why does he do that? This is the question that's begged. Something about that individual is different from the collective that he left behind. He is not satisfied or fulfilled by the images on the wall, the shadows on the wall that everyone else is so enthralled by. And he's released from his chains and ascends to the surface. And that is a leading out process. That is the educational process of being led out of your comfort zone or what you're familiar with or what everyone else is doing. You know, what should be done, as people say, this should be done in this situation.
It sounds, I think this is what the world needs to know the true meaning of education that you just said, to take us out of the cave, to show more, to show the reality. I think you might have read in Advait Vedant philosophy, the example of snake in a rope. Have you heard of that? Snake in a rope?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Tell me what is this? There are a few snake metaphors, but yeah. Which one is this now?
This is a snake in a rope. Like if you are entering in a dark room, you might feel that that is a snake, but in actuality, that is a rope. So this is the world
All right.
also. We see that this is something which is real, but when we go beyond it, we see that this is not real. There is something more realistic. Like you mentioned about the plateau,
Mm-hmm.
everyone feels that this cave is the real thing, but one man who just broken his all these barriers, he went outside and he found that what is real, he found that what is true, he
Right.
found that, and that is what education system is bringing for us. It is showing what is reality. It is.
And I think it's very that he's by himself. That's a key element to that story. Although education can happen in groups, I think that there's a key element at some point in one's development, in one's education. There has to be a part where you're by yourself, at least mentally, spiritually, in order to sort of increase your awareness, to ascend on that path, up the ladder of awareness, the ladder of consciousness, as Manly Hall says. Um, so that's very important. It's a very mysterious event. He is just released from his position on the bench, and he ascends to the surface world. And it doesn't really say exactly why or how that happened, but you do know that he goes up, and it's one person, and what stays behind is a group that decides not to ascend. So, yeah, I talk about this in the afterword a little bit too of the book, the very end of the book, after the last essay, just briefly.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. The point you are talking about well connects with this ideology that we need today to understand the education system, and if there is a defect in the system, like you also mentioned the enemies. So these enemies are the same for our education system also. So we have to just remove these enemies and to bring more realistic nature to it, the more truth to it. So this is what I think we all should learn from you, how we can implement all these ideologies, ideas, and being more superior than being inferior. We can choose, we can climb, we can ascend, we can be conscious when we are climbing. So why we move in the same path? Why we do the same routine? Why should we do the same habit? We should try to be more than what we really are. So that is something very inspirational, something which we all should practice in our life. So what I found in your book, it's not just theoretical; it is also practical aspects that you mentioned. Because you are talking about self-realization, you're talking about the yogic spirituality and all these things. In that sense, you're trying to bring us towards the practice. You trying to bring us towards being more individual in our thoughts rather than collective, isn't it? So it is more
Mm.
about the practical things, the practical aspects. And also when you're talking about the traditional aspect of science, you want uh, us to look into it in a more detailed way, that what we can learn from it and what we can bring something to it, something new to it, maybe a new face, maybe a new perspective, a new arena. So that is what you want us to do, want us to realize, want us to understand. So this all things looks really nice, really interesting, and I'm very much sure that whosoever read this book will get a new insight, or will get a totally new philosophies, which I think they might not have read before or heard before, because you have taken comparison from all the worlds. You have taken comparison from Gandhi philosophy, from Zunzi's philosophy, Nietzsche philosophy, so Aristotle, Plato. You have combined different worlds all together. That was very challenging, of course, to bring all the thoughts to one platform, but you did it brilliantly. And I just loved reading your book, and I'm sure that I will be reading it again and again, because the more I read, the more I get to it. So that is something which I like. And of course, when I'm talking to you, the ideas that you're revealing, I think you also practice it, because it is not just coming out as it is something coming out in a new form. We say, na, old wine in a new bottle. So that way it is coming out. It's like very interesting. It's like very inspiring. Whatever you say, you mentioned about children, like how children are philosophical, and we also have to be more curious. So that idea has just like the idea of also the inferior man, the superior man that you mentioned about the Zunzi, to being more conscious. And of course, the title of the book that you have chosen, I really want to understand how you have got this idea uh, to get to this title. This title is really amazing. Can you just tell us like how you got this idea of this title?
Well, I'll tell you. Originally, I had written this other essay on this place in Australia called Uluru. It's a sacred mountain to the indigenous people there, the Nangu tribe. And originally, that essay was going to be in the same book with these other essays. And in that essay, I critique academics who are opposed to people climbing Uluru, that sacred rock. And I felt that their arguments against the climb were insufficient and just based upon their personal feelings or what they wanted other people to feel. And at the same time, they were not taking seriously the feelings or the worldviews of the people who wanted to climb Uluru. And so that, along with a lot of these other quotations that I shared throughout the book about the metaphorical meaning of climbing, ascending, not falling, but arising, like in Plato's allegory of the cave, arising above the masses, above the crowd, above the general feeling of an age. All of these things had an influence. But I would say originally it was because of that particular essay um, that in which I talked about Uluru and criticized those who think one shouldn't climb. Because it begs the question, what is this thing for? What is this natural feature for? Just like a lot of what is the universe for? You can take any particular natural feature on Earth that we think is beautiful or amazing, and you can extend that thought and say, well, the entire universe is amazing and incredible, and what is it for? And is it fair to let one group of people decide how it should be used? No matter how knowledgeable they are or how knowledgeable they think they are, do they really know? Any class, any group of people, academics or specialists or scientists, always has to remember their knowledge is extremely limited, and so when they try to create these boundaries about these magnificent things that we all can experience, they need to question: do they really have the right to decide how we should experience or what that thing is in the first place, whether it's Uluru in Australia or any other site, Mount Everest, whatever, the Grand Canyon. So this is something I talk about in this other essay, and that had a big impact on my naming of the book originally.
That's a brilliant thing. And obviously, it's so good to see you because more than the writing, I think your charisma is something more. When you speak, it totally connects with what we are expecting. So your writing is definitely it's brilliant. I request everyone who will be listening to this that go through the writings to climb this philosophical and also to know about the philosophy its and its enemies. uh, so More than that, I would just like to tell something more about you if others don't know. Maybe we have missed this part. So about you, you are researcher also. You specialize in comparative religion, philosophy. You also mentioned that you are philosophy of history also you read, and also you have focused on the meanings of ancient symbols and the concept of traditions. And also in your video, I was listening that you have mentioned about the practices, the traditional practices like shamanic practices also you have mentioned, isn't it? Snake and traditions, because this is your other book, the serpent symbol in tradition, the serpent symbol in tradition that you have written. And in that book
Yes.
also you have mentioned about the practices of spirituality, like how the practices like shamanic traditions. Also, can you just mention a few practices that you have mentioned in this book, which might be delight for others to listen and to know more?
Oh, a few practices in the book. Well, there is a chapter on shamanism where I talk about the world tree and the axis mundi symbolism that Mircea Eliade talks about. So we have the world tree, the serpent, the pillar, the temple. All of these things are symbols of the axis mundi, or the center of the world. And these things are symbols used by various cultures around the world throughout history. Again, whether in Asia, Europe, South America, North America, Africa, etc., Australia. Other practices, I talk a little bit about the different yogas, bhakti yoga, jnana, karma yoga. That's not a big element of that book, going into the practices in depth. Um, let's see, I'm trying to think of what else I talk about in terms of practices. Yeah, that's not a huge element. I sort of refer to them here and there. I allude to them places throughout the book, just in connection with serpent symbolism and dragon symbolism. So, Kundalini, we have there's a connection there between serpent symbolism and particular practices, yogic practices in India. And so that's when I refer to that. And I have a few illustrations in the book on that. Um, I don't really go into the practices in Greece at Delphi, at the Oracle of Delphi, in terms of the oracles learning things and transmitting that knowledge. I guess some of the practices in South America with the Ashaninka Indians, where they would ingest ayahuasca, the drug ayahuasca, and they would have visions. And often in these visions, they see snakes, and these snakes speak to them and tell them certain things. And then when they come back to this world, they share this information with their communities in the appropriate ways, what they feel is appropriate. So that's another practice. I mean, if you're talking about practices for increasing consciousness, you generally have ingesting something, some drug, natural or artificial, or you have, strenuously doing something, imposing some discipline on your body, like in various yogas. So those would be the two general categories for practices for evolving consciousness or increasing consciousness.
Wow, that's amazing. You're talking about consciousness, which is again a very deeper subject, and you are trying to connect it to the thoughts of the ancients, the traditional aspects. So, really excited to read this book, to know more about it, to understand more details of it, because snakes and this ideologies and this, symbolism It is something which is deeply connected to Indian philosophies, the practices, because we have the practices also here, we have the rituals also here. Like we have Nag Panchami, where we serve to the Nag Devta. Nag means snake, the god of snake. Okay, so we have all these rituals here in India, uh, where we do such practices where we try to connect with all these living creatures, and we also believe in this idea that all world is family. We call it Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which means all world is family. Every being is family. So I think that I can connect more insight, like I can connect more to this thought and whatever you have brought for us in your this book, the traditions, the serpent, and all these things. And yeah, so I think this conversation was the serpent symbol in tradition. Wow, that's really huge. That's really interesting. It's I think it's double than what I'm reading right now. So again, it will
Yeah,
take me more. Yeah,
yeah,
it's going to take a lot of time to understand the symbols, because symbol is something which is very intricate. It's very complex also. So obviously, I will read it, and also request others to read it, to understand it, to connect it more with the rituals, and more with uh, the human aspects, the being aspects that you have talked about, that we have discussed so far. So let us just now wind this up. This conversation was really amazing. It has given me a lot of new insights about how to see philosophy, how to bring more wisdom to it, how to be more truthful to it. So you have talked about science, you have talked about reality, so many subjects you have covered, and you have also said that being philosopher is being interdisciplinary. It's not that you should be perfect in one subject. You should have the idea, have the mastery, or maybe at least the knowledge about different aspects, and then only you can unite the things and bring something more. And that is what our system is doing right now. We are trying to connect ancient traditional philosophies to this present day's aspect, so that we call it as bringing the knowledge system, the ancient knowledge system or the Indian knowledge system, back to this modern world. We have so many things hidden. So like you have mentioned about the serpent symbols and all these things, the same thing, we have a lot of things which is hidden, which is not revealed yet, because that knowledge source was only meant for the few, many, like means very less people. They were the chosen people who were supposed to read and know all the scriptures. But right now, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to bring that scriptural knowledge. We are trying to bring that Vedic knowledge, as ancient knowledge, back for the world, because this thing happened that during the COVID times, we were not having any idea about what to do. But ancient philosophies have given us the wisdom, right? And that is what I'm learning more from your book, because you have covered about the ancient philosophies, and you have also said that we don't have to totally accept it as it is, but we have to, like you mentioned, something I talked about, the belief. And you mentioned that we just don't have to take it as it is, but we have to understand the application of it. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. uh, is it so? That is what the purpose of learning all this thing for this today world is, because we have to take something more from it. And I think your conversation today has given the new insight to it, like how we can see philosophy, what we can learn from it, what traditional aspect we can see from it. So many ideas you have connected, you have revealed. You have talked about the superior man. You have talked about how we can lose this inferior nature. You have talked about the Zunzi. You have talked about the novelty, the forms, how we can be more novel. You have talked about the animal instinct. So many things. I think the viewers, the listeners, whosoever will listen to it, will get a lot of insights, a lot of learnings from this particular video, from this particular uh, things that we have discussed, because you have so many ideas, as a philosopher, as a researcher, as a lecturer, you have got a lot of idea to talk about. And I really request whosoever is listening, whosoever is understanding this concept, and even our institute, our I teach as an assistant professor here in Jain University. So I request them also, if they listen to it, invite you as a faculty, as something, so that you can really bring some ideas to our world, because you are really connecting Indian thoughts, Western thoughts, everything, and you're bringing something new. So I really request everyone to bring you to this platform so that you can talk, because when you're talking, it's like keep on listening to you. I feel like keep on listening to you, because your ideas are so clear, and it is something which is clear also, and it connects you very easily, because you can really practice it. If anybody listen to you,
Thank you.
we can practice it, we can just learn from it, and we can start practicing, like you mentioned about habit, how we have to be more, like you have mentioned that being, instead of being more habitual, we have to look something more to it. So many ideas you have said, and I will really take a lot of time to digest all the things that you have mentioned. I think I will go to the recording once, learn more to it, and then write something on it. So thank you so much for giving us so many insights, so much of useful ideas. And I would also like to share your opinion, share your view about this conversation, like how you felt, what was your experience towards this thing. If you can share something from your side.
Well, I'm very grateful you invited me and that you gave me a forum to express some of my ideas more thoroughly, more completely to, to a larger audience. And I think you're a great interviewer, so I appreciate that. And a good listener. I had a good experience. Glad I did it.
That's very nice. And I really look forward to reading your next book. And even though this book again I will read, and even I'm very sure that you will meet us again and discuss all these thoughts once again, so that we learn and keep on learning something from it, isn't
I
it?
would like that.
Yes. So thank you so much. I will just stop the recording. Uh, yes.